When I'm talking about earthworks and the ratios or dynamics of how an earthwork is designed, I'm very much conservative in many ways. Hey, this is Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. When we're talking about bench terraces, basins, bunds, and all the aspects of earthworks, I'm extremely conservative in many ways because, one, I don't have engineering level tools. So, for example, when we talk about soil compaction, I'm not actually doing core samples to see soil and sending it off to a lab to determine soil compaction. We're working with how heavy is the equipment, how many layers have they gone over. So, for example, you're putting down small amounts of material at a time, spreading the material, and then they're tracking it, which means they run the machine over top of it. And I'm looking, am I leaving a footprint? You know, I'm walking through it, and if I'm sinking into the soil or the newly put down clay, it's not compacted enough. When we talk about levels and slopes, I'm looking at with a bunion or a A-frame tool, I'm not looking at it with an engineering laser level or something to that effect. So if I'm looking for a 2% grade, I don't want a 1% grade. But I'm okay with a 3% or a 4% grade over the course of the overall water flow. If we're talking about the bunds at the outer edges of a bench terrace, I know they need to be elevated over the back channel. And by the way, at www.prosperityhomestead.org, we've got all the details about what I'm talking about here, about grades and channels and bunds and all that stuff. But the bund itself is the outer edge of a bench terrace. That needs to be higher than the back channel. And if it ever filled up with water, the water should not go over the bund because that could cause a problem with the slope or the outside of the bench terrace itself. So if that bund needs to be 4 foot wide, I'm okay with it 6 foot wide, but I'm not okay with it 3 foot wide. If it's supposed to be 2 foot tall to give you enough freeboard, which is the area above a level water when it's at its highest level, then I want to make sure I'm 2 foot or 3 foot instead of 1 foot if 2 foot is the requirement. And the reason we do this is because when we're managing land projects for ourselves, we may not have the funds to put in everything that's necessary, but if we scale it down to what is absolutely required, you'll tend to get results you can build on. So in the case of the bench terraces here at Prosperity Homestead, they're only 8 to 12 foot wide. Now, for the elevation, for every foot of elevation, you need 4 foot of level at the top. For the elevation, these bench terraces should be 32 feet wide. So either I need to make the bench terraces lower, or I need to make them wider by bringing in more fill. That wasn't possible, so we found a friendly ratio in between that allows us a 1-to-1 on the slope, back slope, and then a wide enough bench to drive a truck out on. The challenge is it can't stay like that, and you need to know. So you can't go get this put together and then plant trees on it. What I'm going to have to do is either, again, lower the elevation of the terrace itself, or bring in additional fill. Now, the original plan was to bring in additional fill, but one of the guys who did some work for me, he didn't give me enough compaction. So what we'll end up doing is a combination of the both. We'll make the bench terrace lower and wider while making it slope better to move that liquid off of the level. Now, a lot of your excavating contractors are not even going to have laser levels and other materials. And if they do, how do you check their work without it? Well, you check the work by being conservative. Now, that does bother your contractors at times. However, it's better to have a bench terrace survive several rainstorms than for it to fail. Because it costs much more to fail than it does for it to be done a little overbuilt in the beginning. Now, of course, the contractor gets paid either way, so sometimes they don't care. Sometimes they just, they want to get the job done and get on to their next job, and ultimately they're doing it to get it done. And sometimes you're going to get a guy in that's real good at doing level foundations, but doesn't understand the overall concepts of grading for rain runoff. I found that foresters are really good at this because they're out in the woods in untreated areas and they're logging roads, for example, which essentially is what a bench terrace is. Their logging roads are made stable because they know that they build them in strong so they can get heavy materials out. So they tend to do a really good job of that with a minimum amount of materials. But ultimately, folks, this is why your design plan is so important. You need to check, double check, and triple check. And you need to monitor and observe the environment. Now, the great thing about this is monitoring and observing your environment could be as easy as taking a walk every morning and just checking things out. If you got a dog, go walk the dog, walk the property, check stuff out. What does it look like before a rain event? What does it look like after a rain event? Have we seen any noticeable changes? Are our plantings going well? There will be areas that you really want to plant out, but you're going to have to use mixed grasses and clover, for example, or alfalfa, because you're just going to dig the area up in a couple months anyway. You'll change some of your designs as you go. I do get the comment periodically about videos that in one video I said I was going to do X, Y, and Z, and the next video I just do X, and then the third video I only do Z, and then by the fifth video I decide not to do Y anyway. Well, these adjustments are being made to adapt to unknown circumstances. So, for example, if you got a guy out today to do excavation work, you don't know for sure if it's not going to rain in the next 10 days on top of that work before you get the seed down. You don't know that in the middle of the work, they're not going to have a rain event that delays the job by 2 weeks because they don't want to run, or you shouldn't run, heavy equipment over clay that is saturated. These are considerations that are going to impact the duration of your project. They're going to impact the cost of your project. And in being conservative, it's always better to spend less and get a high standard of outcome than it is to pay more and get the same standard of outcome. And this is a conservation effort as well. We want to make sure that the earthworks are done in the right season so that they can be grassed out and seeded. So you might have a plan for a beautiful swale that's going to be 180 feet long and it's going to traverse across this area, but you end up having to cap it in the middle and capping it means basically that you're going to dam the end of the swale and drain it at that point because you, for example, are coming into the rainy season. And you've had a couple rains early this season, and you just got to make it secure so that it'll take seed and have enough time for the seed to germinate. Otherwise, the rain event will simply wash your seeds away, and now you've got to start all over again, and you're constantly chasing rather than getting results. Now, this is going to confuse your neighbors. I'm in an urban space, and having grass that's 4 foot tall. So first, they had dirt. They had an area that was completely cleared of trees and then big, heavy, noisy equipment for a couple weeks. And then all these weird trails and paths and pushing of soil around. And then a bunch of tandem dump trucks coming in, just loading up soil during the day. And then it's all dirt. And then all of a sudden, it's straw. And then all of a sudden it's grass and it looks beautiful. And they're like, oh my gosh, the grass is beautiful. When are you going to get out and mow it? And I'm thinking, well, no, this is our first grass. We're going to let this grass grow as tall as it wants to grow. And in fact, even allowed a lot of it to go to seed before we cut it and then spread it out again with our additional. We had several seeding periods while the grass was growing because we have a deer problem. And if we get the initial grass in place and we get it about knee high and then we seed it again, the new seed can establish while the taller grass is being grazed. And then if we let the taller grass get about hip high, then the deer aren't even going to chew on the grass anymore. And the next seeding can get established. And then eventually what happens is you end up with thick grass rather than no grass, where it happened on the other side, lower in the property, where the deer just ate the hell out of everything. Ultimately, we were able to have some grass by sacrificing other grass nearer to the woods, but ultimately to get the whole property under grass that would be mowed, which I'm not going to do. We would have to have sod brought in and then spray it a bunch of times to keep the deer off of it, because the neighbors that brought in sod, they have the same problems that I do. The difference is I had a natural solution, which was allowing the grass to grow a little bit longer, and that, again, protected the underlying tender grass in the bottom, the clovers in the bottom from the grazing animals, and then ultimately allowing the deer to graze out the bottom areas that were closer to the woods and more protected spaces. So I even, by allowing the grass to grow tall, created some shelter for deer. I'd constantly find deer bedded down inside there or behind it because they felt protected. But if they feel protected closer to the woods, further from the house, then I'm better off. That's part of the design plan. If I had been able to finish, let's say I had an unlimited amount of money, and I was able to finish the bench terraces, and I was able to finish the swales, and I was able to get everything under grass, I would have then had a herd of deer. I see 6 to 8 deer at a time out the back there. I would have had a herd of deer stomping all over everything and eating the grass down to the ground, and I would have big muddy bare spots everywhere. This is part of that system. So again, don't worry too much if it's not perfect, but be conservative on the side of protecting a stable, ecologically sound project. Number 2 is you got to double check your contractors, because they may have good equipment. They may have GPS systems on their tractors or their excavating equipment. They may have elevation monitoring and sensing so that they can measure a slope without getting out and laser lining it or something. But at least an eyesight level, a bunion, or a A-frame, or all three, you need to check the work. Compaction, if you take a stick, a little round stick that's 1 inch by 1 inch, and you slam it into the ground and it goes in a couple inches, then it's not compact enough. It should almost bounce off the surface for your core foundation of your bench terrace. And then when you put topsoil on, it should separate only the topsoil and not the clay. Now, of course, once they spread topsoil on it, it's hard to compact the rest, but ultimately you can do a sample area. So you can have them spread out just a small 1,000 square foot area, tamp it and test it, and if it doesn't look right, then have them compact everything else before they spread out even more material. Ultimately, you are responsible for this project. Even if you hire a permaculture design consultant or an excavator or a forester, you're ultimately responsible because you're going to have to live with this project. And if you have erosion problems, if you have a ground that doesn't take seed immediately, if you have other factors such as voles, moles, rabbits, deer that impact the land, ultimately you're the one that's going to have to face it. So your daily walks, you're getting familiar with the land, identifying springs, for example, picking up the rocks so that when you're sickling or you're mowing, you don't run into rocks all the time. These types of things, if you don't enjoy it, then don't go do a project like this. But I can find them a little zen-like. You're walking and relaxing with the dog. You're sitting out there observing. You're feeling the heat come off the hill because it's a little bit elevated. It's creating a microclimate. You're seeing how the water flows or the patterns in the soil after the water has moved across it. These types of things can be very relaxing. They can be very rewarding. And so I encourage you to at least plan on paper your projects, but don't get too concerned if it doesn't come out exactly the way you monitor it. It's probably the reason why most YouTube videos will talk about something they're going to do, or they'll show you something they've done, and then a year later you never see it in a video again because it didn't work out. That's okay. In application, many of these factors will not work out the way you expect it due to external circumstances, but let's be conservative on the side of design to make sure that it wasn't your design that was the problem, and it wasn't your lack of management of the implementation. Anyway, I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. You can visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org. We are a resource for small farms, homesteads, and estates who want to get more utility value from land, and they want land that is ecologically sound and abundant. Basically, land that works with nature so that we increase fertility, so that we conserve soil and prevent soil runoff, and so that we maximize the nutrient value of the production of that land. Again, I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. You can visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org to ask your questions. Thanks for listening.